Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, for wherever you're joining us from. I think we can get started while people are still dropping in. So my name is Johanna Siliakus. I work for the Transport Sector Office at the Asian Development Bank, and I would like to warmly welcome you to this webinar on barriers to electric vehicle adoption and finding solutions by today's speaker, Mani Biona. And as many of you will know, this webinar series is presented as part of the e-mobility support and investment platform for Asia and the Pacific, which is operated by ADB and financed by the Global Environment Facility, the GEF. The aim of the e-mobility platform is to build capacities and to support scaling up of financing to e-mobility initiatives. And we aim to gather a community of e-mobility practitioners under the platform. As part of the platform, we have some further webinar sessions on e-mobility lined up, as you can see here on this slide. And our next presentation of the series will be on the 8th of November on gender and inclusivity relating to EV adoption. So I hope all of you can join. We'll share the Zoom registration link in a bit through the chat function here. And as many of you also will know, we have created a needs assessment survey for the platform, but if you have not yet filled it in, we kindly ask you to do so, as that will help us to further develop activities under the platform. At the end of the survey, there's a possibility to state your interest in joining the e-mobility community, which will ensure that you will receive updates on any upcoming e-mobility platform activities, such as these webinars. And you can find the survey through the QR code on the screen now, and we'll also post a link in the chat soon, directly taking you to the survey. And today's session will be moderated by Tom Fleming from our implementation partner, Integrated Transport Planning. So Tom, let me hand over to you for leading us through today's session and introducing Mani, our speaker. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoy this webinar. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Johanna. Yes, so I thought I'd begin with some house rules. I think those of you who have joined previous webinars in our series will be becoming familiar with these. But microphones will be muted during Mani's presentation, and unless you are invited to speak during the Q&A. The chat function will be disabled, but if you have a question for today's speaker, please do put it in the Q&A, and it will come through to me, and I'll hopefully put it to Mani at the end. But there'll be no sort of interrupting Mani during his flow. And if you would prefer to ask a question in person rather than via chat, please raise your hand to do so, and that feature will be enabled during the moderation session at the end. So that's it for house rules. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide, please. Perfect. So today we are joined by Dr. Mani Biona, and the topic for the session is barriers to EV adoption and finding solutions. So Mani is a full professor of mechanical engineering and executive dean of the Enrique Razon Junior Logistics Institute at De La Salle University in the Philippines, and he's also executive director of the Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines. And as his bio shows here, he's got extensive experience in policy program development, technology and standards development, partnership and capacity building, spanning a range of organizations and national governments. And Mani, at this point, I will, without any further ado, I'll hand over to you and allow you to take the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. Before I start, let me confirm if you're seeing my screen. Is everything okay?
I can see you, Mani. If you share your slides, we'll be able to confirm if you can see them.
Yeah, I have shared my slides already. Just want to confirm if everyone is seeing it. Yeah.
Mani, could you kindly reshare your screen?
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll reshare that, yes. So are you seeing my screen now? Is it okay?
Perfect. Yep, we can see it. Thanks, Manny.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be invited to deliver a presentation on this series organized by ADB. I'd be glad to share my experiences assisting different countries and also working with different organizations and also with different government agencies at various levels. Yep. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm with De La Salle University. I'm with the Enrique Rezon Junior Logistics Institute. At the same time, I'm the executive director of the Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines, and I also do consulting on e-mobility and sustainable transport. Yeah. So for this afternoon, I'll be talking first about the country EV motivations because that affects a lot the barriers, and then you've got the EV market and vehicle segments, country peculiarities, barriers and solutions, and then key points. Okay. Why EV for countries? So most of the time, I think you're all familiar with these things, but these are things that I have encountered. All countries are pushing for EVs to as part of their commitments, climate commitments, so GHG mitigation, and then for some countries like Philippines, for example, air pollution is an issue, so it's also part of the air pollution program of the country. And there are also a couple of governments that have surplus renewable energy, like Laos, for example. So they're pushing for EVs to utilize whatever spare capacity they have, and of course, power is very cheap in Laos, and they're importing the petroleum, so it's also for energy security. It's very similar also here in the Philippines. So it's one of the key motivation of the Philippines to push for e-mobility. We're losing so much of our reserves from so much of our dollar reserves by buying petroleum, and yeah, and it allows us also to diversify our energy utilization. And of course, lastly, this is for Philippines one of the major factors for Philippines is pushing for it is to support industry development. We feel that this is a good chance for the country to make a mark again in the automotive industry. And I last week I just came from Bangkok. It was also the same with other countries. So we had a conference on global electric two and three wheelers, and almost all of the countries have ambitions on becoming an industry hub for e-mobility, at least for the two and three wheelers. So yeah, so that is also a major factor why countries are adopting electric e-mobilities. Yeah. So this I'm sharing in here what we've done here in the Philippines, and what we found out is the barriers vary across different vehicle segments, also varies across market segments. So that is something that I'm gonna do also this afternoon. My discussions will be based on the market segments and on the vehicle segments. So looking at this chart, for example, I don't know if you've been to the Philippines, but if you've been to the Philippines, I'm sure you're very familiar with the jeepneys, and most electric jeepneys that are being supplied in the country are locally made. And comparing that, for example, to buses wherein electric buses are expected to be sourced externally, then there are some technical considerations that needs to be looked at, technical barriers that needs to be looked at when looking at electric jeepneys. The same way also that jeepneys and tricycles these are mostly informal sectors, and they have lower capacities for investments, and that also poses additional barriers for the adoption of electric vehicles in their market segments. So different market segments, different vehicle segments would have also different barriers. And okay, if you combine that to the peculiarities across countries, in fact, it's not only across countries, even within the country, like in the Philippines, if you go to Mindanao, electricity and the gasoline prices are very different compared to Manila. And especially if I compare, for example, electricity prices to the Philippines with Laos, electricity prices are very cheap. So that's why even without any government support, I was surprised to see a lot of electric vehicles in Laos. So that's one peculiarity: electricity energy prices. Another thing, bank lending rates that affects the financing program. So It varies significantly across countries. But of course, we all know that the economic situation of countries varies a lot. And the amount of support or financing access of small and medium enterprises also varies from one country to another. Why am I highlighting small and medium enterprises? For some vehicle segments, these are mostly provided by small and medium enterprises, like the electric two-wheelers and the electric three-wheelers. And lastly, also, you will see in there another graph that shows the number of climate disasters in the ASEAN, and you will see in there Philippines having one of the most having received one of the most number of disasters over the years, and these climate disasters are normally related to flooding, and that we have flooding and typhoons, and yeah, so that is also one consideration. For example, the Philippines, flooding and rain. So why am I highlighting these peculiarities? Because this also poses different barriers. So different countries would have different barriers based on their market segments, vehicle segments. At the same time, considering that they have their own peculiarities in terms of economy, in terms of climate, in terms of financing programs, then the barriers could also vary from one country to another. So just to emphasize again, the various solutions are affected by government motivations and capacities, affected by the EV markets. I've said the market and the vehicle type. Then you've got also country peculiarities. Then you've got the vehicle. You've got also the vehicle segments. Okay. This is also a snapshot of an analysis we've conducted during doing the comprehensive roadmap for the electric vehicle industry in the Philippines. I think it's very clear in here that there's a very strong relationship across the different across the different barriers. Oh, as I mentioned earlier, one of the main motivations of Philippines to go into electric vehicles is to be one of the main players in the EV industry. But one of the key barriers for the competitiveness of the local EV manufacturing industry is a lack of demand. The quality of electric vehicles, on the other hand, also affects the lack of demand. So there is that very strong relationship across the different components of the barriers, and this has to be widely recognized. In fact, when I was doing also barrier analysis and program development, e-mobility program development in not only the Philippines but also in other countries, I would always call the strategies or the components of the solutions as pillars. So if you remove one, everything goes down. So it's not possible to just address one barrier. You have to address all, because a lot of these barriers are strongly interlinked with each other. And as I mentioned, the barriers could vary from depending on the vehicle segment. So let me now go through the different barriers that are common to the different to certain vehicle segments. Let's start first with electric buses. Normally, for electric buses, the main issue would be the higher upfront cost. Over the years, the life cycle costs has also been an issue, but recently costs of electric buses have gone down. So the main issue would always be the higher upfront cost, and that becomes a problem if the market segment itself don't have access to financing or have limited access to financing. In some countries, some of the bus operations are informal in nature, so they have very limited capacity to finance the uptake of electric vehicles, and they have also very limited access to financing. So if you couple that with higher upfront costs, then that becomes now an issue. Another issue also would be technical in nature. Number one, technology inertia. So whatever convincing you would do, they would always say that, okay, diesel buses are better than electric buses. Well, it's because they've been using it, they trust the technology, and especially if the operations is informal in nature, that's where the livelihood depends. So they'd rather adopt something that they're used to rather than adopt something that is new. There's also that aspect of skepticism in terms of availability of parts, availability of technical support, and also electric buses are more complicated to operate. Right now, the range of electric buses is around 250 to 300 kilometers at the most, and most of the time, and of course, if you're going to factor in the um, the minimum state of charge, then that goes down further to around 200, 210 kilometers. And in most cases, the distance traveled by buses are the daily distance of travel by buses are more than the range of the buses. So you have to do charging in between, and that complicates the operations. And in some countries also there's a problem on the reliability of power supply. I'm doing right now a project in Lebanon, and the main issue is the power supply is not that reliable. So we have designed a system that will be mostly depending on solar power, but of course that limits the number of electric buses that may be rolled out. And electric buses are normally charged at around 100 kilowatts, and that could have a very big impact to the grid. And especially if you do opposite charging, or wherein you charge the buses at 300 kilowatts or more, and as that definitely grid impact definitely would be an issue. And as mentioned earlier, some of the electric bus operations are informal in nature, and that presents a very big social issue, because you now have the sector needs to do now two paradigm shifts. First is to paradigm shift that they no longer own the buses; it will be owned collectively by a cooperative. That is one paradigm that they have to adapt to. And the second one is a paradigm of adopting the electric vehicles. So it's a new technology, and the concept of having a new loan for the financing of the electric vehicles. So that will be quite that will be a major social issue that needs to be addressed. And most of the informal bus operations, they are not optimized. So which means then that if you adopt electric buses and if you rationalize the operation, chances are you'll be needing lesser number of buses than what's being utilized right now, and that displaces some of the players on the ground, and that's something that needs to be that needs to be addressed. And then we have also information and education issues. In the Philippines, only few bus companies, for example, are aware that there are already electric buses that are available in the market. So for one, availability, where can they buy it? Next, they've got also lots of questions about the technology. And a common thing that often comes up during consultations is what happens during flooding. So looks like there's a lot of information, education stuff that needs to be addressed. In Laos, it's more on the safety side. They're very conscious about how do they do the annual inspections, and will the government be able to do those things to ensure the safety of the people? So it looks like there's a lot of information education gaps that needs to be addressed. So what solutions could be adopted? So this is not exhaustive. These are just some of the major solutions that we can look at. As I mentioned, I would often call these solutions as pillars. So one would only work if the other is also adapted. Key number one is optimized rollouts. What do I mean by optimized rollouts? I have there an example in the graphs below. You have there the number of trips. And normally, if you plan out an electric bus operations, if you want to electrify the whole route, you end up with something like this. You've got some of the buses traveling more than the other buses. And normally the amount of daily distance travel with buses would also have a very big impact on the viability of buses. So if you would want to optimize the investments, it might be better to not fully electrify a route, but instead electrify parts of two routes, for example. So you electrify most of the operations of buses that are doing more trips in the two routes compared to have electrifying route fully, but some of the buses will be operating lesser in some days. So that's one thing that you can look at. Then you've got also strategic tariff and excise tax exemptions. We've felt the effect of that now in the Philippines. Electric vehicle prices have gone down, especially for the cars, because of the removal of importation tariffs, and also excise taxes since 2018. We don't have excise taxes for electric vehicles already. Strategic in the sense that, as mentioned, some of the countries also have industrial ambitions, and this has to be calibrated with the industrial ambitions of the country. As mentioned, one of the major issues is on technology inertia. And so initially it would be hard. I would see transport cooperatives and companies it would be hard to see them adopting electric buses to onset. Initially, the risk would have to be shared by the government, or in some cases, government might even have to fully invest on certain routes to demonstrate the viability of electric buses, or co-invest in some of the routes. And why is there a test program there? What's the difference between the two? Okay, you can have a pilot program. You electrify one route fully. That's a good showcase. But again, if you're dealing with cooperatives, transport cooperatives, and companies wherein their income depends on the buses, it's very important for them to be able to test the buses themselves. So these pilot programs might have to be complemented by allowing these bus companies, to test the buses themselves. They test them for, maybe provide 3 or 2 buses to the different loan 2 or 3 buses to different urban bus companies, to let them operate, provide them the technical support to be able to operate it efficiently, and let them see the economics, let them see the performance. A preferential franchising rules and incentives would also be very important to manage the technology inertia. One thing that could be done, we're looking at that, we're toying with this idea when we're working on the comprehensive roadmap, is to, okay, I'm going to award you one electric bus route. I'm going to award you one additional bus route if you adopt electric buses in your route. So it's more of that one, preferential franchising. Or there could be a assessment scheme where in electric bus operations are prioritized, applications are prioritized to operate on certain on routes compared to diesel buses. Now, phase modernization. There has been so much attempt to electrify while at the same time formalize, or at least modernize at the same time formalize the operation. And there's a lot of cases that this has failed. So the idea is it'd be good to first address the structure of the operations, the ownership of and operations of bus services. And once that is addressed, once you have consolidated the operations, because when you say informal, you have one operator operating one bus, then you've got several operators serving a route. And that would be very hard. The operations would be very hard to optimize if they're not integrated into one corporation, into one company. So it might be that initially focus on integrating all the players in one organization, and then a second step would be to modernize their fleets. Normally, doing these 2 things at the same time would be very, very difficult. Then you've got also the vehicle technical standards and regulations. Having this somehow manages the anxieties around the safety of the bus, of safety of the vehicles. Then, since we've got so much information, education gaps, then forums, fairs, seminars, and webinars would be very important. That is on the short term. However, in the long term, then we have to go beyond the pilot program. And what happens beyond the pilot program? We need to have the green financing program. We've done some financial simulations, and soft loans would help a lot. It's not actually only soft loans, because when you're talking about public transport, they would always, especially if it's informal, they would always compare this with their status quo. So they look at annually how much do they spend operating operating the vehicles? What are their financial bottom line at the end of the for at the end of each year? So so it's important to adopt strategies to ensure that in each year of the operations, the net cost of the net cost of operating the buses are lower compared to the ICE or equal compared to the ICE option. So green financing is one, and that would include reduced interest rates, or in some cases you might need to extend the payment period to reduce amortization. And in fact, what we've seen also is unbundling the battery from the vehicles and rolling out a battery leasing program also helps distribute the cost. So which means that even in the early years, while the bus is being financed, being amortized, then you've got already some net benefits there. Again, strategic tariff and excise tax would have to stay for some time, and it would be good also to look at the government e-bus being tied up with local assembly. This is the case if governments also have ambitions to set up a local EV industry. So government bids tied up with the local assembly would also be an attractive options. And in some routes wherein electric buses are not yet still viable, then government investments or co-investments could still continue, or service contracting could be adopted to subsidize the operation. And yeah, this is very important to couple with the green financing. Financing alone will not work. Screen that you've got technology inertia that needs to be addressed, and mandated adoptions needs to be introduced. This could be in the form of a minimum share, or green routes. These are routes that are fully served by electrified units, and eventually you can introduce EV credits program. So how does an EV credits program? So this is already on the later stage. Okay, wherein EV adoption credits could be traded across different operators, because there might be some routes wherein technically electric buses might not be able to operate because of certain rated power limitations or certain range limitations. Okay, but then operators there might have to get enough credits and buy enough credits from those that have surplus EV credits to continue to operate. So this is very similar to the renewable portfolio standards concept. Then of course, vehicle technical standards and regulations would have to stay. Okay. Electric mini buses and jeepneys is very similar to buses, but why am I separating this? Normally, bus operators would have their own fleet, fleet management systems. The smaller buses are more highly informal compared to electric buses, and utilizes commercial maintenance workshops. And you've got then electrifying, therefore these units would have an impact to the automotive and service industry. So I won't be going through the strategies that I have mentioned already with the electric buses. I just would want to highlight the new stuff that's in here. So if you're doing electric minibuses and jeepneys wherein the operations are more decentralized, the impacts to the industry would be different. And one of the impacts I've mentioned would be the impact on the EV servicing industry. Then you might have to look at also rolling out EV servicing certification accreditation program. And this could be tied up with the incentive support. And same also, since this is more highly informal, and normally the vehicles are also rolled out by smaller companies, unlike with big buses, then there might be some business financial support for both for the operation, also for the vehicle suppliers, for the SMEs. But this could be tied up to technology standards compliance and minimum local content. For taxis and ride-hailing services, this is very similar to electric buses. This is mostly formal, but to some degree, These vehicles utilizes also commercial workshops, and there would be impacts also to the automotive industry. So yes, EV servicing certification accreditation program would be needed. However, this sector compared to the small bus, to the minibus operations, normally have more capacity to finance the adoption, especially for the ride-hailing systems, for example. I've seen some ride-hailing operators or apps providers or app service provider in other countries wherein they themselves do the corporate financing, and this could be incentivized by the government through maybe green business loans. Yeah, so the burden of providing the financing, you can actually co-share this with the ride hailing companies. Again, this is the same. It's important to have the mandated adoption policies. Delivery vans, we're looking at logistics companies and also corporate service fleets. Very similar to taxi operations. Normally, these companies have the capacity to finance the adoption of new vehicles. Although not all, that's why you might still have to roll out some green vehicle and business financing program for the smaller companies. But for the bigger ones like DHL or DHL, FedEx, normally they have capacity to finance the adoptions, and at the same time also it's in their core of the company values to go green. So I think we see here in the picture that the DHL has an initiative to adopt electric vehicles already in their fleet. So what really matters more in this market segment is to introduce the mandated adoption. And for the motorcycle taxis, these are also mostly informal, very similar to the electric small bus operations. But the main challenge here is to standardize the battery platform. This is one of the major topics that we've been discussing last week during the Global Electric 2 and 3-wheeler forum in Bangkok, and there were certain strategies put forward on how to standardize this. And one thing that could be adopted, for example, is what Thailand is introducing. So they're tying up the incentives to the battery platform standardization. So they've got a program to subsidize batteries. So companies now will be motivated or will be incentivized to adopt the standardized battery packs, because these are subsidized. Of course, it does not provide also the restriction to use other form factors of batteries. Or battery vehicle unbundling, that's also very, very important, because that brings down your upfront cost. It's very similar also to the 3-wheelers. Battery platform standardization is very important, because most of these 3-wheelers operates also in battery swapping, and it allows you also to unbundle the cost of the batteries from the vehicles, and that addresses immediately the upfront cost issues. However, this is easier said than done, because some financing industry like banks or microfinance view the unbundling of the vehicle and the battery as a risk. I've been talking with a couple of banks, and they have raised this. It's a risk in the sense that there is a third party wherein the contingent operations of the vehicles depends, and if let's say the battery provider suddenly shuts down, then that affects the contingent operation of vehicles, and that leads now to default of payments. So there needs to be mechanisms on how to encourage the financing industry to recognize battery vehicle unbundling programs. There are also some overarching barriers, like for institutionally, for some of the countries, there's unclear benefits. So most of the time, greenhouse gas mitigation is not enough to um to push countries to push for electric vehicle adoption. And as mentioned earlier, normally this requires EV adoption requires an integrated solution. And in a lot of cases, I've seen that the governments don't have the framework to ensure that the actions are coordinated. So there could be a need for an interagency body to coordinate all these actions. And normally this would include the transport agency, manufacturing in the and trade and industry agencies, the energy agencies, the environment agencies, and also even the local government units. And the mandates of each, I've seen also lots of overlapping programs across different agencies. So there has to be clear mandates, and there has to be an oversight function. And it would be good if this is supported by a law. And I've seen also lots of overlapping and redundant programs with technical assistance. So that's why country programs don't really progress, because most of the time a country technical assistance would start with policy analysis and never went beyond policy analysis. So it's important to have a roadmap work program so that when technical assistance comes in, they just look at that and then adopt one of the components of the roadmaps and focus on it, so that you're able to avoid the redundancies of the programs. And there's also lots of institutional capacity gaps in terms of policy development, in terms of policy implementation. This has been often highlighted by governments. They're asking for trainings and capacity building programs for them to be able to craft the right policies. Some of them would even need like the basic EV 101 training program, free to orient them on the basics of EVs and of course eventually how to move forward. And this would have to include local government units. As I mentioned, barriers could vary across market segments, could vary across countries, and could even vary internally within the country. And that's where the local government role comes in. So it's very important to not only capacitate the national government agencies, but also the local government agencies. Another overarching barrier is that there's also an effort there's also an anti-EV effort. This normally revolves around the concept of technology neutrality, but if you look at economies that have successfully adopted electric vehicles, the programs were anchored on providing advantage and preferential treatment to electric vehicle adoption. Without that, EV adoption will never progress. Another concept that's also being put forward always, like HEV is EV, and this would have a very big impact. Like, for example, if a government mandates the adoption of a certain percentage share of taxes to be electric vehicles, and if the program considers HEV as EV, then and HEV are cheaper than EVs, that it would be very hard for EVs to go into the into the market, or because companies would normally choose HEVs over EVs because of the cost. And some arguments also that are being put forward is HEV is a good foundation for electrification, but in fact, electrification efforts, or the main gaps initially would be more on lack of charging infrastructure. So in that case, then it's a perceived gap. If you go back to my previous slides, I have not highlighted except for certain segments, I have not really highlighted the lack of charging infrastructure. Because right now, for cars, for example, normally it's start on 400 kilometers is more than enough to be operated daily, and they just charge them at home. So yeah, and we've seen this in some countries. You have very minimal charging infra, but you've got so much electric vehicles. But having a charging infrastructure manages range anxiety, at least conceptually, and that could facilitate adoption of vehicles. And having HEVs don't support that. It does not create a market for charging infrastructure. So, and I have encountered also cases wherein the argument highlights that the HEV is more environmentally benign than electric vehicles. These may be true in certain market segments in certain cases, but this is something that you cannot generalize. But this is what is being propagated, and I think this is something that needs to be addressed because this affects decisions of governments. And then the second and last is somehow valid manufacturing and service industry impacts. However, what I would always this is being highlighted, like how many jobs will be lost in the manufacturing industry, how many jobs will be lost in the service industry. But what I will always highlight is this won't happen overnight. This will be very gradual, maybe the span of 5 to 10 years, and you'll have enough time to adapt to the new industry and the new technology. And yeah, and this also mostly coupled to the readiness issue. But the thing is, you'll never be ready until you start until you start your program. And yeah, so but these are just some of the anti-EV efforts that are ongoing and concepts that are being propagated that I feel the EV industry have to address. Another overarching barrier would be the predominance of fossil-based fuel in generation in the grid mixes. So it's important to have renewable energy roadmaps, and there are actually a couple of possibilities of coupling the renewable energy and the EV industry. We have put forward proposals to provide reductions in power tariff if the charging station decides to go for green power options, either remotely or on site. Having EVs could also, it would be good to have demonstrations of EVs supporting smart grids, and also demonstration programs of having used batteries as auxiliary power storage for renewables. This would have to be further explored. So just some key points. So for the solutions, we have to consider ambitions, capabilities, the market, the vehicle, and the peculiarities of one country to another. The main trend of actions normally would involve demonstration, and then you mandate it, support. You have demonstration, and then ensure that there is just transition. Things could not be rushed. As I've said, in some market segments, you're looking at significant paradigm shifts, not only one concept that needs to be shifted. So it's got to be a phase and just transition approach. Then you support the adoptions, and while at the same time mandate the adoptions. So support alone will not do the trick. And there needs to be a strong institutional support and capacity building program. There's a need to counteract anti-EV initiatives, and of course, a push to clean up the grid, and considering that conditions could vary from one area to another, then localized solutions needs to be anchored to local conditions. Not even in most cases, not even national level. We need to be more local than the national level. So that will be all, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Manny. That was an excellent presentation, and I really liked the thematic approach that you took there to different vehicle segments. It's clear that there can be no one size fits all solution kind of to e-mobility adoption. I thought the reflections you provided on the importance of local context and understanding of local markets, also institutions, were really, really key. I'm conscious a little bit of time, and we are overrunning. I'm going to encourage participants to put any questions that you have for Manny in the Q&A, and I will do my best to pose them. I mean, just to begin, Manny, I mean, you mentioned overlapping programs being a bit of an issue, but what technical assistance programs should governments be looking to implement? Do you think what should they be prioritizing, given the vastness of the landscape we've got here?
Yeah, I think two things. Okay, number one would be to have a thorough scanning of what programs are existing, so that there is no overlap. And then second is to implement a capacity building program in the onset, making government understand more electric vehicles, because that will greatly facilitate things. Now the next things that have to happen.
Fantastic.
Because they know better.
Okay.
They know better the local guys, the governments know better their situation. So equipping them with the basics would allow them to craft the solutions themselves.
Brilliant. Thank you, Manny. And it struck me that many of the challenges that you presented are the technical challenges, and there are very many technical challenges that need to be overcome. How many of the barriers do you think are issues of perception, perhaps, that can be overcome in different ways?
Come again?
How many of the barriers do you think are issues of perception, Manny? Sort of misperception of EVs. You mentioned HEVs at the end of sort of the anti-EV movement, and I know I know there are very many technical barriers, but perceptive barriers, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's a very big issue right now. It's because it kind of delay the aggressiveness, the aggressive programs on electric vehicles right now in the Philippines. For example, I am afraid if HEVs, for example, are counted when the minimum mandated shares are eventually rolled out to the public transport sector and to the logistics sector. That would indicate whatever gains the EV program has obtained in the past 3 years. So yeah, so I think there needs to be a very good communications program in the international community to counteract whatever initiatives to negate electric vehicles. And also, it's not only about EV and HEV. There's a lot of negative perceptions also or not negative perceptions, but a lot of technical concerns that may be non-existing in some cases. For example, flooding. So normally we would educate them that there's the IP protections of vehicles and this kind of thing. So also the range. A lot of them thought that they can operate it without electric vehicles, but if you explain that the range of taxis, for example, normally taxis only travel around 200 to 300 kilometers per day. And range of electric vehicles are like around 400 kilometers. That's becoming a standard. So this kind of things needs to be addressed.
Thanks so much, Manny. We have one further question in the chat, which is from Alvin. Alvin asks, what do you think should be the main strategy for the HEVs for developing countries, the HEVs for developing countries, which are eyeing electrification? Would you recommend full leapfrogging? Thanks.
Yeah, normally, what I would recommend is depending on the market segments. For high mileage segments, you would have the economics of EV adoption there. The idea is to adopt EVs. Like if I'm talking about buses, taxis, you've got the economics there. But for the household sector wherein you only travel around 30 to 50 kilometers per day, HEV for now could be a good solution. Because that segment also could always remain as a technology neutral ground, considering also limitations of some of the countries to finance. So it's more of optimizing whatever funds that you have. If you got funds, focus that to the full electrification of not full electrification, but focus that to the electrification of high mileage sectors. And then so prioritize that, and then the household sector could remain as a technology neutral sector if you don't have the funds to support it. But at least educate the public that there's also the option of plug-in hybrids. Because plug-in hybrids are not as expensive as EVs, but they support. It's a good foundation for electrification, because that would require also charging networks that supports the creation of the demand and this kind of things.
Superb. Thank you, Manny. Conscious of time, we have run over, so at this point I would like to bring the webinar to a close. First off, just to thank you again for your time and coming to speak to us today for the e-mobility platform. We really appreciate it. And if anyone's got any questions, I'm sure, and if you share, we'll share the slides around afterwards. But if there's an email contact in there as well, I think that'd be great. People can reach out to you. There's a link to the platform survey that's been shared in the chat. So as Joanna mentioned at the top of the webinar, if you haven't filled that out, please do. We'd really appreciate your inputs there. And then the next webinar will be held same time, same place. On the 8th of November, it'll be Heather Allen, and Heather will be introducing the topic of gender and inclusivity in electric vehicle adoption. So that's the next one on the program to look forward to. So as I said, we'll bring the webinar to a close there. Thank you for your time. Thanks to all the participants online for joining. I know we had another good attendance today. So hopefully that maintains through the program as we progress the remainder of the year. And I hope you have, sorry, my voice breaking up a little bit, but wish you all a fantastic afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we'll catch up soon. Thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, thank you.